Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Sounds. This is Year Zero. Today, Matt Erickson and Coop join me once again on the show to discuss myth and the historical utility of myth. This is a big subject, and obviously we could not cover it all in an hour and 20 minutes, but there will be more shows following up on this subject. So stay tuned. RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs and check out his book, Project Manicore. It's pretty good. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. Yes, on the camera. Yes. All right, man. I got my boy Coop. What's up, Coop?
Everything, apparently.
And yeah. Matt Erickson is the other voice you hear laughing in the background.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me back on, guys.
Yes. Well, Coop had this excellent idea to have a conversation about myth, society, or how would you put it, Coop?
Well, the role, history, and purpose of myth in human societies and psychology, ultimately, what place it has for us, and how much it's needed, really.
Yeah. You had actually, I just found the comment. You had summarized it as myth, behavior, and symbolism is the way you had summarized it to me.
Yeah, that was a really broad definition, so that I was kind of searching for a specificity, but I think that it's a topic that, well, first of all, it's difficult to discuss what symbols are because they require kind of a visual reference point to go along with them. In that you can use the more common symbols, such as the cross or anything like that is generally well known. But as far as getting to origins of those symbols and their roots in mythology, it would be, as I say, kind of difficult to cover without any visual aspect. However, archetypes are also symbols. They're psychological symbols in that sense. I guess we could kind of start with kind of the history of mythology and the role that it played. As most things started with an oral tradition. The oral traditions became oral traditions purely because they were important in some form or another. You didn't pass down, the fact that you stubbed your toe last week when you were hunting onto generations. They were stories of monumental events that ultimately represented something that would have a meaning to the future. And that was the reason these things were passed down. In that sense, they were established as guides for behavior in societies that didn't have written histories, but still required a certain amount of cohesion in order to keep themselves together, so to speak. So when you get beyond just a small tribal family group, there was a requirement for cohesion in those larger groups, and the basis for those cohesion was having the same story, which is something that you hear frequently bandied about today, about the history of my people or the story of my people. So mythology roughly started in that sense, and it broadened out to become less specific the larger the society that was passing that myth on became. So our concept of mythology starts in the West. What we're educated in predominantly is the Greek mythology, most widely. Like, everybody has heard of Heracles, everybody's heard of Zeus, everybody's heard of Aphrodite, et cetera, et cetera. And the stories of those individuals and the archetypes that they filled still are relevant to today's society. You could say that they were precursors to the concept of Catholic saints, in that Catholic saints typically have a realm in which they have influence. And so if you required some assistance with something, then you would pray to that relevant saint. Just as in Greece, if you were looking for love or was having trouble with love, then you would make an offering to Aphrodite. In that sense, if it's also reflected somewhat in the Hindu pantheon, where everybody has a family god that is a representation of the larger deity, that has a very specific realm, such as money or trading, or again love or warfare. In that sense, you have that common strain in all mythologies, reaching into modern religions. And the reason that they're common is because they fill a psychological role, and human psychology is similar regardless of what culture you're from, or what nation you're from, or what ethnicity or what region you're from. So ultimately, mythology is predominantly related to human psychology, as far as its development, as far as how the stories go, as far as what they're supposed to teach, and the effect that they have on greater society. Anybody else got anything to add to that? I'm just trying to kind of define what it is.
I was actually talking to my wife earlier about this, and Matt turned me onto a podcast called Lord of Spirits, and it's a couple of Orthodox preachers who are kind of breaking down the Orthodox tradition. And one of the things that stood out to me so far in what I've listened to is when they were talking about the written tradition and the oral tradition, and how the written tradition is a monument to the oral tradition, because they didn't write down things for thousands of years, if not millions of years, in that these traditions were passed on and passed on and passed on, and that it was only written down once it was believed that the society at large was losing the grip of the influence or the necessity for the stories, for the oral tradition. So we can look at these written stories as monuments to ancient times.
It's like the writing is a symbol of the actions, which were themselves a symbol of a larger, greater truth. Right. And I was thinking, as Coop, as you were talking, I was kind of visualizing the an archetype, like a mythical archetype, as it's the way that our brains think outside of the reality that we live in. It's kind of like the way we break the maybe like the membrane that contains the material world. We break out into the mystical, because it's like for the example of you're wanting something with love, so you make a sacrifice to Aphrodite, or you participate in a ritual that is intended to create a certain outcome. And whether or not there's an Aphrodite or something like an Aphrodite that can respond to you, when you do that, when you open up your mind and you say, there's this thing here that I don't understand, but if I do these specific acts, it'll give me something that I want. It now opens your mind to the possibility that you can have that thing that you're trying to get. Whereas if you didn't have that mechanism, if you hadn't created this irrational mechanism, then you might just feel like it's just not possible for me to find love or whatever the thing is you're trying to get. So one of the most powerful forces in the universe is the human mind and the power of human belief. So if there's a mechanism that can help you believe something, even if you don't necessarily have evidence for it, then that mechanism by its own nature will cause the elevation of human performance. So when human performance is elevated because of participating in this ritual, by definition, it's going to become, through evolutionary selective pressure, the most effective rituals are the ones that are going to win out, because the people who do the most effective rituals are the ones who survive, and the ones who don't by default fall away. So
that's amazing. That's amazing that you mentioned that, Matt. That's amazing.
Okay.
Because the other day I was thinking about this topic and how to approach it. And I wrote confidence. Ultimately, what mythology does is mythos is give you confidence in your actions. This is already a well-worn pathway that I can follow with an expected outcome according to the imprint of that mythology, or the story of the individual that mythology is covering. And that confidence directly affects the way an individual carries themselves, right? And as far as like you mentioned evolution, as far as selection goes, right? What that confidence does is it attracts attention, right? So that the other qualities of that individual are considered, right? So in that sense, what mythology represents is kind of a static social agreement on its purpose, in that it can, following those mythological paths, can give you the confidence that expresses itself to the outworld in order to attract what it is that you desire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that affects on a base evolutionary level. What that does is it makes you more what can I say, more likely to be successful in the selective role, as far as the base passing your genes on, like say attracting a woman, or attracting confidence in your skills or your ability or your how can I say this? It makes you more socially noticeable, which increases the likelihood of the success of yourself and your progeny, so to speak. So to a certain extent, mythology, just like faith, right, can allow you to be fearless and move forward through your life in a confident pathway, right? And if it's not God looking after you, it is the story of the mythology that you have faith in, right?
Right.
Which is really interesting, because it's very different than confidence today that we see, right? Confidence today that we see with the relative lack of mythology. I wrote that it's now the success one has at normalizing their pathologies, right?
That's great. Yeah.
If you can fool yourself into normalizing your pathologies, then you are going to carry yourself with the confidence of somebody that should have a natural confidence. However, unlike the mythological pathway, it does not have the tradition. So if that is your pathologies are revealed to not be normal, then it crumbles your confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a person following a mythological or archetypical path has the confidence of thousands of years of success being represented in that pathway.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
a failure in that sense is not the end, whereas a failure in the normalizing your pathological aspects, failure is the end, which is the crushing of the ego, so to speak. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there because you hit on the same note that I was writing. I was kind of surprised. It's awesome.
There's a little serendipity there. I was thinking of mythology as being kind of like it's almost like a transgenerational parent, kind of, in that it plays the role of giving you something. It gives you something protective to inhabit that, for the sake of your psychology. So it like a mythology is to your psyche what a parent is to your physical body, perhaps. That it allows you, it gives you constraints within which to operate, and then kind of guides you through the process of navigating that space. And then in the effect of that, then, so a good parent will yield good children. So the people who operate within the context of a coherent mythology, or an effective mythology, one that's stood the test of time, one that's lindy, then those people are going to naturally be more successful, and they're going to be the ones who naturally generate more children, better children, healthier children. They're the ones who, because they're acting most closely to, like, in accordance with reality, they're yielding the rewards of that. So it's going to be great resources, et cetera, everything like that. So there's like selective pressures within selective pressures that are optimizing for the best possible thing. And I think as you were, the last part of what you were saying there, I think that mythology is inextricably bound up with faith. And I think faith is a component of, the human psyche. I think, what's that?
Well, if you look at success strategies, right, that are environmentally determined, there's something called the R strategy, which is to have everything fast because you do not feel the need to accumulate, or I should say, you do not feel the need to invest, right? And that is very much associated with atheism or irreligious belief. Whereas the K strategy, which is your actions are guided by long-term strategy for success, right?
Right.
In other words, you invest more in your children. You invest more in finding a good mate for your child. You invest for a long run, right? Is represented by the concept of that faith, where you have to have faith that this long-term strategy is going to work for you, right? And now, how that works is based predominantly on environmental pressures that set the tone for the psychology of the social group, and also have to do with heritability from your parents. So tying that in, if you're inheriting from your parents a long-term strategy and it is attached to a mythology, then you have the very real presence of your parents as a guide in the material, with the, as aforementioned, confidence that a mythology provides that your long-term strategy investment is going to yield better results, and more successful progeny, more success in projects, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you're living a fast life, you have no need for the mythological pathway. You have no need for investment. The concept is to get yourself out there as much as you can, because you do not know what the future is going to be, or you're fatalistic with regards to it, almost nihilistic to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that represented in today's society, is in our strategy society, and it's directly related to the lack of mythology and the lack of religiosity, the lack of faith in the greater social aspects. More people are living the R strategy because, well, fuck it, you only live once, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I live for the moment, live for today, and things like that make the rounds all the time in the common parlay.
It is kind of funny though, like I mentioned this to Beatrix earlier, that every once in a while you see this mythology pop back up into the social structure and into the kind of the mimetic idea of what society is supposed to be. And I think the last time I saw it pop up was the pay it forward trend that had popped up, I don't know, was it 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think there was a movie or something that
right. Yeah. And you had this whole idea of paying it forward. And I was telling her, this is just an archetypical construction of what the Savior or the Christ or whatever you want to call it would be, was that selfless person putting themselves through distress for the salvation of mankind.
It's very unnatural.
Right. That is not your instincts. Yes.
No, your instincts are for your in-group preference, radiating from your own progeny or your own interests outward and growing weaker as it expands outward.
Well, let me ask y'all a question, because this is something that I talked to Pete about, and we brushed up against it, but so many of the concepts that he and I were talking about were so complicated, we didn't spend a whole lot of time on one, which maybe we should just do a show on one of these concepts and really like tackle it. So I look at the abandonment of mythology, right? And I see that it led to a clinging of reason, especially into the sciences. And there's this whole thing going on now, like trust the science, as if the science is the divine. And so you look back in the 20th century and you see what happened when man tried to rule themselves through rationality. You had the advent of fascism, you had the advent of communism, probably 500 million dead just from these two ideologies alone. And so as man recreates this Tower of Babel moment, they are creating chaos and destruction across the world, especially for their own citizens. And so the importance of mythology seems that it keeps man from elevating themselves to these levels to where they can pour their corruption onto society as a whole.
Well, there are a lot of mythological stories that warn about the power of ego, and they show show the effect of going off the path that once was a direction that you should take. Hercules, the labors of Hercules, and Hercules enraged and killing his own children and things like that. And the sins that he committed that he had to later pay for, is a concept of look, this is what happens when your ego gets too big, right? Or this is what happens when you grasp for things that you should not be grasping for, and then you're going to have to do something to atone for it. That's a constantly repeated story. But you mentioned basically a Nietzschean concept with regards to the rise of atheism, kind of correlating to fascism and communism. He remarked on that quite deeply, to a certain point where I don't think I could do justice to what he was talking about better than him. So if you wanna get in on that topic, get into some Nietzsche. His most famous quote is "God is dead," so to speak, is his remark on that. I would say that the deviation from mythology actually started in Greece, ironically, or I should say, at least the Greeks created the form which would evolve to what we have today. The mythologies and stories were played out and acted in theater to a certain extent, and that was actually co-opted from Egyptian public rituals and ceremonies that were held. That was also just a form of theater, and then you had that expand into the rituals, say, of the mass, which again is theater, and then it actually evolved into theater itself. The Jesuit theater troops that roamed around Europe, basically putting ideas into uneducated peasants' heads that would form the politics in the direction that they wanted it to go. So it's kind of started being used as a direct inculcation to affect social movements. And then that, of course, moved into television, and from television into theater. And with that, you have the dissolution of mythos as a pure form into the mythos, modern mythos, being purely a propagandistic effort, where they would utilize or touch upon well-worn mythologies, but redirect them to serve a purpose of the elite or the ruling class, or whatever operation wanted to put those ideas out there. So that's part of the problem, is that the mythos that we used to have in its forms is now corrupted by the intention of the individuals producing it and co-opting some of its themes and structures to take advantage of the fact that mythos is our pathway. So we have corrupted pathways now that used to be pure in their tradition, so to speak. Anybody want to add something to that?
I had a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Yeah,
I had a couple there. There was first of all, as you were talking about, you're following this chain all the way up through theater, up into the movies, going all the way back to Egyptian public rituals, and I think honestly, if you look at each step of that process, it's all each of those instances is serving the same social role. It may be perceived differently, but it's serving the same social role. It's embedding archetypes. It's the human interacting with the mythology, with the mythological world. It's the way that humans engage and interact with it. And I would say that it's progressed even beyond television and to social media. I think a lot of social media now is the same thing: public rituals, public like enactments. People are now, it's not just movie stars. Like anybody can go on and we can sit here and we can publish a video of ourselves talking like this, but like things like TikTok and Instagram and some of these very visual ones, these are all people engaging. They're embodying, enacting mythologies. They're playing characters through through media that are not themselves, and they're not just random characters. They're archetypical characters. Everyone has kind of an archetypical role that they're embodying. That was one thought that came to mind. The other one was something I've talked. I don't remember if I've ever brought it up last time we talked, but it's something that I've talked about on my show quite a bit. What I see as the process through the Enlightenment of people operating within a Christian frame, ultimately reforming, or you could say evolving Christ out of the church, but attempting to retain the structure. So the process of the Enlightenment was a continuation of the Reformation, and the Reformation was an exercise in either updating or altogether eliminating aspects of the mythology. They're removing various rituals or changing them to become adapting and becoming a different mythology, but it's descendant from the original mythology. And so one variation of that ultimately became it flowed through the movement of that ultimately led to Descartes, and then through all the way up to Nietzsche. Those are kind of the two main points that have stuck out to me. And what it is in effect, it's the creation of a parallel Christianity that has externally, it has basically the exact same form. It's the exact same structure, except instead of having Christ at the head of it, as the head of the mythology, it has man. It has the capital M, and the ideal conception of the individual is the way that I've described it, like the Cartesian individual. I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
And so from then,
therefore I am God.
Exactly. Because that's what was the name of the Christian God? I am that I am.
I am that I am.
Well,
Right.
it wasn't it Aristotle that said that God is, the concept of God is like a thought thinking itself. And
that sounds yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you though, and I don't want to interrupt too much, but I did want to ask you, is this kind of along the lines of where you were going whenever you were saying that the Enlightenment was a mistake?
Yeah. Yep.
That's kind of what I gathered. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I framed it that way specifically because it's provocative, and apparently I like being provocative. But I mean, I honestly, if you tried to pin me down, I would say I don't think it was a mistake. I don't think, because it happened. It was inevitable. I think it was inevitable that it was going to happen, because part of when you start studying things like mythology and archetypes and that kind of thing, you start recognizing the cycles that this is almost like, this is science. This is science for human psychology. People look at this stuff as very woo-woo, and I guess kind of it is, but what you're doing with this, like the Machiavellians, it's kind of tangential to this. It's connected. You're studying the human mind, the human experience, as if you were studying a phenomenon like ants or bees, like trying to understand their instincts. Where do they come from? How do they behave? What are the patterns in their behavior? What are the patterns in the way? So you're just extending that to thought. What are the patterns in the way that human beings think? And what do those patterns tell us about humans? And then from then it's like, oh, well, I guess we actually are humans. So what do those patterns tell us about us? And when you try to pretend they don't exist, like if you say there is, when Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't exultant. That wasn't a celebration.
No, it wasn't.
That was an oh shit moment.
Yeah.
That was God. We just killed God. There's a big vacuum here that's going to be filled, and if we don't consciously fill it with the best thing possible, it's going to be filled with really, really bad shit. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
So then the last thing I'll say here is that I just listened recently to Jonathan Pajot. This is very interesting because I've described libertarianism as Christianity without Christ.
Right.
And that's really because libertarianism, I think, is the fullest realization of liberalism. It's just the most honest framing of liberalism. And so I was listening to Jonathan Pajot, and someone asked him in a Q&A, they said, what would be the what would the Antichrist look like symbolically? And so he kind of thought about it for a minute, was kind of reasoning through it. And he said, what he came to is, he said, basically it would be like Christianity, the form of Christianity without Christ. And I was like, oh shit, libertarianism is the Antichrist. but in a like actually in a technical sense,
he's accurate.
I think he is. Yeah. And I think in a technical sense, this is what liberalism ultimately is, an attempt to recreate Christianity without Christ. And if you try to recreate Christianity without Christ, you're inverting it. You're directly inverting it, and you're placing, instead of having a man made in the image of God, you have a God made in the image of man.
Right. And then you have the inverted cross. One of the things I've been talking, because you turned me on to this damn podcast that I keep listening to. And one of the things I was talking to my wife about, who, full disclosure, she's extremely atheist and I'm extremely agnostic. So this is like really interesting conversation at my house. And one of the things I was telling her, I was like, well, so if the early Christians believed that angels were messengers, right? And that all ideas and thoughts came from angels and came in the form of angel, and they weren't your own. They came from external forces that were angels that were delivering these messages to you. Could the Antichrist be science? Like if you read the Revelations and you replace everywhere that the Antichrist is mentioned with the word science, would it work out? I haven't tried it yet.
like capital S science.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Well, you certainly cannot describe the process of science as an entity in itself.
Right.
What Tommy is hitting on, I think, is the fact that we've kind of anthropomorphized it to a certain extent, and given science character attributes.
Yes.
In order to kind of familiarize ourselves with something that most people are ignorant with, that used to actually terrify people.
Mm-hmm.
There's the whole mad scientist concept that is out there for a reason. It was applied to nuclear scientists, for example. It was applied to anybody that was practicing in realms that very few people were educated in, and seemed to have no ethical boundaries because it was new. And that should sound familiar, because that's what's happened with the internet. So there's a certain fear of the internet, with the capital I, having characteristics and concepts, because we have become dependent upon it, but we don't understand the ethical boundaries or issues that it may incur, because it's a completely new thing, right?
Yeah, the earliest scientists were all theologians, and then I mean, like Isaac Newton was an alchemist. I think John Locke was an alchemist.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It was a transition from alchemy.
Right. It was basically, so I mean, the earliest scientists were basically also like into witchcraft. That was like, there was a major crossover there.
Yeah, like John Dee's and Francis Bacon.
Yeah, Francis Bacon. Yeah.
Examples.
Yeah.
And even before that, Roger Bacon, who was a monk, he wrote observations on the concepts of science and related them to mysticism, despite the fact that he was a monk. And this was way before all of those other guys. But as far as that's something new, we have that new concept, as you mentioned, this social media and people fulfilling archetypical roles in who they play as online. And it comes along with the concept of the new internet and not having any ethical boundaries. So, and to a certain extent, we're seeking the mythological within social media in order to provide us with some type of reassurance that goes along with this unknown concept of internet with regards to how it's going to ethically play.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the archetypes that are being represented in social media and judging the value or the ethics of the internet by those players in social media. And then that's being amplified by the media.
Mm.
And that's kind of a description, not a complete description, of why social media stories, or what people do on social media, is what makes the mainstream media as a story as though it has the impact of something much greater than it actually is. Because we're seeking a judgment of this new thing. Right.
I'm listening to a audiobook right now. It's called In Our Own Image, and it's about the creation of AI with a conscience, right? And Pete and I, this is another subject we brushed on the other day, was it's if you have a conscience and you have rationality, you have reason, but you don't have emotion, you have a sociopath, right?
Yep.
And so basically this creation, this AI that is being created, they are attempting to create sociopaths. And anytime AI has been attempted in the past and introduced to humans, its first instinct is to murder all humans because of the destruction that humans bring upon the world. And
well, to a certain extent, we should be happy about that, because science is, if it, capital S science, if it rejects the mystic, right, then it will never be able to replicate that which requires the mystic, right? So intelligence requires the mystic.
Mm-hmm.
It's what's defined as spirit or soul or whatever.
or as Jung put it, that collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In technology, if it lacks the ability to generate that, then you cannot have what we would call intelligence, right?
Right.
Because
it's ultimately a closed system.
yes, and mythology is to a certain extent, I would say, what how do I put this? Sometimes the words are hard to find. Mythology creates the template for the unknown within ourselves, that we require faith in order to move forward or progress in our lives. I don't know how much of a word salad that was.
It's like faith is that which mediates between us and mythology. And mythology is, it's like the primary tool that we use it's like the tool that leads us into the unknown.
Yes. And without that, we all behave as though this could be our last possible minute. Right?
Yes.
And nothing.
So as you shrink that down and you lose mythology, and people start living their lives as though it's the last possible minute, what you're doing is completely eradicating social connection, the concept of social, right?
Aren't you also ridding humanity of the desire to like truly progress and truly experiment?
You're just creating nihilism. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Nihilist, self-serving, and that goes into the complete lacking of a conscience.
Yeah, you're creating high time preference incentives.
Yes. Yeah. And more or less no accountability to the future.
Well, and that's one of the things that Peterson touches on, and this would be an interesting thing to have y'all touch on here, is this idea of bargaining with your future, right? Because you're basically saying it in a nihilistic sense. You would never look to the future as being anything, even a possibility of existence, right? I mean, that's like one step before suicidal, right? And so what Jordan Peterson brought up, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was something he said that humans have an ability to bargain with the future. And that statement, I mean, still, it gives me goosebumps. That statement blew me away. And I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking at everything wrong. As soon as I heard that, I knew I had been looking at my entire life incorrectly, you know? And it was unfortunate.
Yeah,
I was 40 years old before I heard it.
And he said, and specifically, he said that sacrifice is the means by which we bargain with the future,
right?
Because the future doesn't actually exist. All that exists is the present moment. We're in the process of creating the future. We're creating it and participating in it at the same time. And so when you make a sacrifice, you are putting an imprint on the future by changing something that you do now. You're acting in a different way now to have the net effect of your actions imprint the future and create a almost like a quantum tunneling effect, kind of where you create an open hole that allows you to get zapped forward into that next moment, kind of. So by sacrificing, you transcend it.
Projecting your will into the future.
Yeah.
He used a really good Simpsons allegory for that one too. He was Homer was drinking a quart of vodka and eating a tub of mayonnaise, and Marge was telling him, "You're going to pay for this in the future," and he goes, "That's a problem for future Homer. I'm sure glad I'm not that guy."
Well, that's funny because they're in a literal sense almost that is a different guy.
Yes.
even in a biological level, because he's going to be made up of different material in the future.
Right.
The future version of me is a different person altogether, where it's almost like we are a different person at each given moment. And what we call ourselves is just the accumulation of all of those across time, the accumulation of all those individual people mashed together into one kind of like one consciousness.
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with the concept of an egregore?
I'm not.
Yeah.
This was,
Of course he is.
someone exposed me to this just recently. I'm pretty sure it was Nicholas Blanchard. He's at Cheap Seats Econ on Twitter. Very, very good follow. If it wasn't him, he's a good follow anyways. For your sake, Tommy, an egregore it's an occultic concept, and it's a non-physical entity that manifests itself through people. So it's basically like, if you imagine how Carl Jung said, people don't have ideas have people.
Yes, this is also related to the concept of genius, which comes from genie or genie, which is something that is from without. And Socrates touched upon this, saying, well, you already know everything. It just takes somebody to bring it to your attention in order for you to realize that you know.
I did not realize that's what he was talking about. I do remember reading that.
and there's another attachment to that. It's the concept of Matt, just carry on. I've got to think about this.
Well, what I was I'll just go with what I was thinking just right now. It's that when you're having a brainwave, like something's coming to your mind, you're having an aha moment. At least this is for me, and I've heard other people describe it the same way. That you experience it like you're remembering something. That's like if you could describe the feeling in your brain of it, it would be like you're remembering stuff that you've never thought of before. It's coming to you in that sense. Like something's just like boop, it just appears in your mind, and something put it there. You don't know what it was, but you once it's in there, then you like see it as a picture, and then you have the process of like incorporating it into your life.
It's the closest definition by structure of the word recognition.
Yes. Recognition. Yeah. You're recognizing it. You're recognizing it. Oof. That's okay. That's going to get me thinking for a while. When someone exposed me that concept of the egregore, I'd known what it was, but didn't know that it actually was a thing. And when I realized that it was a thing, it totally transformed my perspective of Christianity, because suddenly the concept of the body of Christ or being indwelled by the Holy Spirit, those concepts took on a whole new meaning. And then it also, like, the NPC meme made a lot more sense to me, because the NPCs, like, we have this almost like this instinct, like the NPCs they're not people in the way that other people are people. They seem to be a hive mind. They're all sharing a consciousness, and they're all like role playing as that same consciousness. So then if this concept of an egregore is a real thing, that's like this is we talk about people being possessed. People are possessed by a spirit.
Wouldn't that
this
be
is just making that literal?
Wouldn't that be the root of the aggregate?
Yeah, same word.
Interesting. Okay.
Aggregate means to bring together or together.
Mm-hmm.
There's the German word is Zeitgeist for this.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at, to bring that around to the social concept, is that we're looking at the branching off of from an original or traditional mythological set of pathways to the formation of new ones, right? So the culture war is nothing more than the birth of a competing zeitgeist.
Yes.
By deconstructing old mythologies and old thought ways, and things that are very relevant and developed out of the needs of our species, right, into something that seems to run counter or does not have the legacy of the old pathways, that is creating a zeitgeist to impose itself on and deconstruct the traditions of the other mythologies.
It's spiritual warfare, like in a literal sense.
It is in a literal sense, very much so. And the reason that there is the resistance to it, right, is very much based on an evolutionary level. Even if people don't understand the mechanics of it, right? They still have a set of principles, ethics, and the way they look at life that is very much rooted in the evolutionary mythology, not this new formation of the zeitgeist that is called progress. I think that's kind of what we're experiencing today on the psychological and mythological level. If you really wanted to pan out to the big view. The question is this new zeitgeist and its mythologies going to represent the success that thousands of years of the evolutionarily informed mythologies have? And I'm doubtful that it does.
Yeah.
I don't think that encouraging people to not have children to a certain extent is not going to result in a betterment for our species.
Mm-hmm.
Like by definition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
There's it's interesting that there's a parallel I'm seeing here that, first of all, I think I tweeted something like this a while back, because the idea popped into my head very, very clearly. I remembered it. And it was that the surest way to destroy a group of people is to cut them off from their tradition, because their tradition is their context. It's what they use to move forward. And if they can't move forward, they'll die. So in a it's like their parents. So then there's a parallel here to removing a child from its parents. If you take a child away from a parent from its parents, there's a reason people generally think of that as one of the cruelest things that you can do, because we recognize innately the importance of that relationship. And our tradition is like our parents. Our tradition is like our intellectual parents, kind of. So what's happening here is that there's like a new zeitgeist where, like you said, where it's basically attacking the old. So it's like a rival new tradition is attacking the old tradition and trying to supplant it. And the nature of this new tradition is that it manifests in people acting in a way that literally dissuades or compromises people's ability to procreate. So it's happening there's a fractal nature to this dynamic, to this. It's an idea. It's a tradition attempting to destroy a prior tradition, and the tradition that it's trying to replace it with is one that destroys its holders. It destroys the people that hold the tradition. It cuts off their line. And to tie that in, again, relating it to Christianity, I mean, the Christian, the part of the Christian conception of evil is that evil manifests itself through demonic powers and principalities who hate humanity, and they want to destroy humanity because of things like envy or basically because God has special plans for humanity that the angels and demons aren't privy to. So taking that, when you, whether you believe it or not, taking that and comparing that to what's happening now, there's a match. That's what this dynamic seems like. This dynamic seems like it's a manifestation of the Christian conception of evil.
Yeah, it's one of the things that one of the other things that Jordan Peterson has said in the past that really struck out to me is, okay, you're an atheist. You want to get rid of Christianity. What are you going to replace it with? Because people have this tendency to worship. And what do we have now? Wokeism, SJWs. Like, is this better? Like, was communism better? Was fascism better? Like, what are you as a person, as a man, going to create that is going to replace this thing that has been there for thousands of years? And that's one of the things as an agnostic I look at and I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here I'm missing. Maybe there's something I can learn from from this book that is called the Bible, right? Like, if nothing else, I need to investigate further.
Yes. Well, that also touches on the reason that Christianity was so adoptive of other mythological stories, right? So Christianity said, no, our Jesus is much like your hero in this mythology. Right. So in fact, they're one and the same. So it's not really too much of a big deal for the group or the people to transition into Christianity because they do not need to abandon the mythological framework that it provided that society. And that's why you got various like hybridized forms of Christianity in the early church before you got Catholicism. And Catholic means universal, right? So Catholicism was the development of a very rigid mythological perception, right? As it was determined that the other populations that had received Christianity had it embedded long enough in their culture that all of these things could be tied up into one concise, universal church. And all aspects of paganism, so to speak, could be then abandoned. But previous to that, you required that easy transition from the set of traditional mythologies that people had into the universal Catholic concept of Christianity.
I know that I remember Paul, I don't remember where this was, but I remember Paul speaking to the Greeks. He has specifically addressed their pagan gods. And what he said was basically what you just said, that he's not approaching them like an atheist and a Christian talking to each other and saying like your gods don't exist. What he said is your gods do exist. My God, the Christian God, is the God of those gods. So your gods do exist. My God is the God to the gods.
Yeah, so my God created them.
Right. So that frame then is much easier to accept. You're not having to radically change, because this is something I thought of recently too, that human beings we naturally resist doing a 180 on something that we believe. What we want to do is take that and incorporate it into what we already believe and say we still believe the same thing. We just changed it, even though we're having a completely different change. We still want to believe that, like, basically we're going the same direction and we're still the same person, all that kind of thing. So it's very easy to just naturally make that transition from the pagan gods to the God of Israel. So what I see now with the woke movement. The woke movement is actually a continuation of the tradition of Christianity, and it's attempting to it's a form of legalistic Christianity attempting to purify Christianity. So the basis of their critique of the prior generations is essentially, you guys aren't good enough Christians.
We have the higher ethic.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They're attempting to purify or improve upon Christianity.
Yeah, but they're making a whole new thing. Yeah. I mean, I would say they would reject Christianity, but they're going to use the template that Christianity was built upon to build their thing.
Right. They're rejecting this instantiation of Christianity consciously, but then subconsciously they're using the framework of Christianity that they could only derive from Christianity. They exist in the heritage of Christianity.
Right.
They're effectively Christians. Like the basis of their ideology is the elevation of the victim. It's identifying the victim, that the victim is ultimately the savior.
Mm-hmm.
That's a distinctly Christian ethos that hasn't existed anywhere in any belief system prior to Christianity. Right. So that's in that sense, they're like, I believe that you can't separate an idea from its history, that they're inextricable from each other for a lot of the reasons we're talking about here. And so in that sense, because they're using a framework borrowed from Christianity, effectively they're Christians who are saying this instantiation of Christianity was not sufficiently Christian. Here's what Christianity actually looks like. Here's what it actually means to care for the downtrodden and the weak and the sick. Here's what true religion actually looks like. But then consciously, on the conscious level, they're rejecting what they see themselves as not Christian. But what I'm saying is that their operating system is still Christian.
I want to insert a joke real quick because you just made me think of something.
What?
So do you remember the comedian Sam Kinison?
I'm familiar with him.
He used to have this joke, but back in the 80s, there was this whole campaign called Rock Against Drugs. Do you remember this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I do.
Okay, yeah. So his whole bit was rock against drugs. Rock created drugs. That's like Christians against Christ.
That's good.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
It is a common cycle throughout history where something that is predominantly good as a reason is used to enact the worst policies that you could possibly imagine. Like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And what wokeism is the road to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And it is paved with good intentions. But the purpose is clouded because it lacks the mythological evolutionary framework for success. In other words, it's taken the focus away from the personal responsibility of expanding your relationship to the mythology, and instead it's turned it into a group effort. And within any large group, you get it large enough, then personal responsibility can be deflected or absolved, and you get a mob mentality. So they're trying to match the Christian ethos or with groups, as opposed to Christ's original concept of you having a relationship with God or with the mythology. And as a group, you're absolved of personal responsibility. So to a certain extent, this is like a child that wants all the benefits of being an adult, but still wants to remain a child.
Yeah.
And that's not a path to success by any standard.
It's interesting you framed it that way, because it's like a very, very close to something I've said in the past, which is that they're attempting to have the benefits of having all of the power while also having the benefits of having none of the power. They're trying to have both of those at the same time. Like when you claim victimhood, you're saying I'm the one with no power. But if you're using a victimhood claim as a way to obtain power, then you're doing both. And so it's the same as trying to have the benefits of being an adult, but trying to have the benefits while also having the benefits of being a child. It's ultimately the evasion of responsibility. It's the evasion of you have a responsibility to embody the myth. You have a responsibility to fit yourself into the world, to occupy the spot that you're supposed to occupy. You're born into this natural obligation. And if you fulfill that obligation, if you naturally embody your role within the myth, then you can think of it however you want. You can say that God will bless you. You can say that reality will shine upon you. You can say that the universe will reward you. However you want to frame it, that's what's happening. When you embody your responsibility to the myth, then you'll be rewarded accordingly. And I think then those rewards that you get, those are rights. That's your right. Your right is to be rewarded for embodying the myth, for fulfilling your responsibility. And if you start with the rights, if you say I have rights, therefore you're inverting the structure. You're beginning with the material and trying to cause a cause with an effect. You're beginning with the material and trying to shape the mystical based on what's in the material, when you have to flip the other way around. You have to start with understanding the mythology, embodying yourself within it, and then you can move forward from there. So ultimately the woke instinct to reject the mythology and start with the rights and start with the abandonment of the responsibility makes it like a manifestation of this spirit of Antichrist, the trying to create Christianity, but you don't have Christ to do it with. You don't have the mythology to do it with. So you have the form of it, but you don't have the substance.
I want to hold on. I got to stop us. Matt, you have a heart out, dude. I want to make sure we're still good.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Let's finish up this little segment of the conversation. Then
Okay. I just want to make sure we're all right.
Thank you.
I'm trying to watch the time here.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Well, I was gonna add to that in the sense that in pre-Christ mythologies, right? there wasn't really defined the concept of good and evil gods or archetypes to a certain extent. And it wasn't until Christianity, and of course there's Zoroastrianism that had this concept of good and evil. With the advent of Christianity and the concept of personal responsibility, they had to create a very well-formed structure of evil to a certain extent in order to account for the fact that this was a mass mythological system. So they had to create a very hard line for people between the mythological pathway you should take and the mythological pathway that you shouldn't take. And therefore, that's where the good and evil dynamic or dichotomy came into effect. And so they made the teaching of Christ a very hard line on what archetypical pathway you should follow, and actually describe its rewards as heaven or even status amongst other people, things that were very also evolutionarily based in their development. And the lack of responsibility, or the absolution of responsibility or personal responsibility, the effect of egoism, even I believe in one of Christ's teaching, he says, if you agree to do work for somebody and you agree on a certain price, and the next day somebody comes along and they're doing the same job as you, but they negotiate a different price, then it is a sin for you to go to your employer and ask for the equivalent of the next guy that came along, because you agreed to that contract. Right? Which is the ultimate expression of personal responsibility through the contracts that you give other people. And how that relates to other people's ability, right, to plan for their future, right? The employer is relying upon you sticking on to your contracted agreement so that he can progress in his future, and you become personally responsible for the contract that you make, and upholding that is what is required for other people in society to set forth plans for their future. Right?
It's a personal responsibility is a scaling point, or is a shelling point. I don't know how you pronounce it. I've only ever read it, but it's that point around which anybody can consolidate without having to communicate with each other. They can all arrive at the same point. If everybody is invested in a system that incentivizes personal responsibility, and you're someone who's proven yourself as someone who will practice personal responsibility, then you don't have to have a communication system for people to naturally cooperate, get along, facilitate together.
Well, I was speaking even in the direct, like more direct material sense of it. If I'm the employer and I'm thinking that this guy is going to do the job at the price that I negotiated with him, I can take whatever else I'm earning from that job and apply it to a future, under the assumption that that's not going to change because that person is responsible for upholding their contract. And if you expand that out to greater society, then it's how an individual can operate to the benefit of others in their society to a certain extent by upholding their personal responsibility. Right? So the guy comes back, he asks for more money, and the employer goes, well, I'm sorry, I've already spent that money as a sacrifice to my future based upon what you've already agreed. Right?
Right.
And that's why there's a big problem with capitalism.
Mm. It's a
Damn it, man.
the way of keeping it's your way of creating the future. You're able to create the future and create assurance of the future by everybody
For others as well.
Yeah. So you do your own and everyone else does themselves. So it's I mean the future at large. Like if you had every single person on the planet all operated on this basis, then the future would be assured. Like
Your
you would already know what the
bargain,
future is.
yeah, your bargain with the future depends on other people keeping their bargain with the future.
Right.
And that's actually just a perfect example of like a really micro example of what mythology represents is the pathways for success that the individual can follow that benefit the greater society around them in order to ensure the future for their lineage, for their society, for their genetic interests.
You brought that around full circle real nice.
Yep.
Thank you.
We're going to have to do this again.
Yeah. I have one last thing I want to say.
We're not done here.
The one last thing is to the concept of the idea of good and evil, that ultimately something that doesn't work can't be good. It has to work for it to be good. So in the same sense, something that doesn't exist can't be good because it has to exist in order for it to be good. So good and evil is ultimately what works and what doesn't work on a universal time scale, a universal scale. So temporally, spatially, it's like the absolute, the eternal good is the thing that works, the thing that works 100% of the time. Absolutely. That's like what like to make something universal, make something eternal. So in a sense, you can think of Christianity as you can think of the God of the sorry, I'm getting tired here. You can think of the Christian God as he's life. That's within the Christian context. God is life, like in a literal sense. Life is him. And so when you're connected to him, you partake in life because you're connected to him. So ultimately, the prescriptions that he gives are the things that work absolutely eternally on a universal scale. That's what's good. Good is the thing that works. So the prescriptions are the way that, so if you embody that mythology, if you act according to the construct of that mythology, you're acting according to the thing that works the best which is the ultimate good.
Now everybody go. I was just going to say, now everybody has to go read Genesis 1 again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that's the evolution of all of the individual mythological pathways, which were blended to a certain extent. Blended in to be suited for particular cultures based upon their environmental demands, and applied to large scale, and paring down the things that were regional or provincial or very specific to individual groups of people, and applying it to the greater concept of human psychology, like based upon an observation of our species. Right.
Right.
All right. We're going to go for like 6 more hours. Matt, you got to go, dude.
I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Plug, dude. Plug away.
All right. You could follow me on YouTube, Kingpilled, all one word, KINGPILLED. Follow me on Twitter at RealKingpilled. And you can also get me on Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton. Get that on any podcatcher or on YouTube.
Links will be in the show notes. We're going to finish this conversation one of these days. We'll do it again. We'll set it up here in about a month or so. We'll
deal.
Give everybody a break, like, so they don't have to think so much. But then what? Because I got to dive into this fucking. I'm going to have to listen to this damn thing 3 times for the next one.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right,
it's
dude.
an honor.
I'm going to stop the recording. You go when you're ready.
You wanna be a hero, instead you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you, with the flag you waved just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for a solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Of those who are to blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.